Hi, my name is Cassie McCormick, and welcome to my video presentation of my final project for ED 411. I did a learning menu for simple inequalities in secondary mathematics. Hope you enjoy.
So for my final project, I chose to create a learning menu for simple inequalities in secondary mathematics, which would be around 6th or 7th grade math. And I chose a learning menu, which is a way for students to navigate through a lesson and gain knowledge in their own way, following their own path. The product is really a series of activities which build on each other and that the students choose. There are diverse activities, and you start off with something simple. I call it chip and dip. So you choose one chip and dip option, and that can be a quick write, a pre-test, something to get the students thinking. It's kind of like a before activity or a bell ringer. Then you have your appetizer, which gives the students a taste of the knowledge that they're going to gain. It gives them somewhere to start, a starting point on the road to mastering skills and understanding definitions and meanings and procedures. Then you move on to your entree, which is the meat of the lesson, or the during, really, and it has the students apply what they learn in the appetizer, and through that they learn more and more about the topic or the simple inequalities. And then you move on to the dessert, which is a way to summarize or wrap up the whole lesson. It's how the students can sort out their thoughts or conclude their learning in this segment. And then I added the ticket. It's the inevitable part of your meal where you have to pay for your meal, but everything that you gained throughout the process was worth having to pay for it. So my ticket is a quiz or a test. The reason that I like learning menus, and I decided that this is what I wanted to create for my final project, is that it really is what you make it. You can make it as simple or as complex as it is needed. You can make it as digital or not as digital as you need it to be. It's kind of one of those things that can go with the flow. If something's not working that day, you can still go on with the learning menu most of the time. It also really promotes diversity in the classroom and addresses each of the students' diverse learning needs, because they're able to choose between several different activities, and you can make the activities as different or as visual or as artistic as you need them to be for the amount of students in your classroom. It promotes equity because it provides learning and interest for all students. I also think it promotes success for those reasons, the same reasons as it promotes engagement, because of the interests and passions that you can include. And when you get to know your students, you can pull from those interests and passions and put things that apply to those in your learning menu. Like a lot of my learning menu includes people who are musically talented. It will help them, and people who like to make videos, or people who are artistically talented. And then there's also just the plain old people who like to watch how you solve the problem and then solve the problem. So it really connects with all different types of learners. It also promotes collaboration, and there's a lot of technology integrated through it.
The learning menu is supported by the constructivist learning theory, which is based on the premise that students value knowledge more when they have found it on their own. The inquiry-based research aspect of the learning menu promotes retention of student knowledge and student success.
So how it works is that students start at the beginning, and they can work in pairs or groups or individually, and they start with the chips and dip. So the chips and dip, they choose one, and this is kind of the part of the meal that you get immediately when you sit down. So it activates your learning, and it's built on throughout, because you know how you go to a Mexican restaurant or whatever, you get chips and dip, and throughout the meal you still have the chips and dip, and they still bring you chips and dip, but you've built on that, and you've built on those options. So that's kind of what this is about. And the two choices here that they can choose from is a pre-quiz that is on Google Forms, and this the chips and dip is worth 5 points out of the whole 250 points. So if you do the pre-quiz, you get 5 points, or if you don't, you don't get the 5 points. Then the other option is called parking lot thoughts. So you write down, they're given a prompt about simple inequalities. What do you know about simple inequalities? Do you know the inequality symbols? Do you know how to solve them? Have you seen anything like this before? Write it all down on a sticky note and park it in the parking lot. And that's a board that is on the wall, and they can place their sticky note there. And that's 5 points if you do it, and 0 points if you don't. So the whole chips and dips section is worth 5 points. They choose one or the other, and they get 5 points for doing that. The next part is the appetizer, and this kind of prepares you for your meal, gives you a taste of what you're doing. And this is the part where I included the research. It begins their learning, and there are 4 options. They have to choose 2 of the options. The first one is Khan Academy, and this is where you watch the videos, you watch the examples, and you complete the problems. And this will show them what the inequality symbol means, how you flip the inequality symbol when you're solving it, and how you graph it. And here, each of these 4 options are worth 25 points. So when you choose 2, there's 50 points out of the whole 250 points for the whole learning menu. And the first 10 points for Khan Academy is that the student actively participated and stayed engaged throughout the Khan Academy activity. And there's 5 points for working and discussing collaboratively with partners when they had questions or when they were learning. Then there's 5 points for completing the activity, and 5 points if they presented an understanding of the material. As I was walking around and observing and speaking with them, if they presented that they were understanding the material and they were engaged, they get that 5 points. The next option is web research, and they're given 3 reputable websites where they can do their research. They're given the 3 learning goals at the beginning of what they should be researching. And this is also worth 25 points. So the first 10 points is the same: actively participate in the activity and stay engaged throughout. Then there's 5 points for working collaboratively, completing the activity, and presenting understanding of the material. Then the next option is a chapter reading, and this is for students who really just, they want to read how to do it, complete the examples from the book, and write it down. And that's okay because you have to choose 2 options. So those students that chose this as their first option, that they really just want to read the chapter, they're still going to have to go back and do a digital application of this, or enrich their research with other digital tools and resources. And it's the same points. You get 10 for being actively engaged in the lesson, 5 for working collaboratively and discussing with partners, 5 for completing activity, and 5 for presenting an understanding of the material. And the last option is a discovery lesson, and this is a digital lesson that I found on layingthefoundation.com. This is something that I've used a lot in my student teaching. They call them LTF lessons, and they're really pushed by people in secondary mathematics because they help students understand the how and why behind things in math. And this is a digital lesson that they go online, they complete it online. It's kind of like a lab in science or something like that. And the same point system: 10 points for being actively engaged, 5 for working and discussing collaboratively, 5 for completing the activity, and 5 for presenting an understanding of the material. So that was the appetizer. That's altogether is worth 50 points. They have to complete 2 25-point activities for that. Now after that, they've gotten a good understanding, an okay understanding of what inequalities are, maybe a little bit of how to solve them, and they've done a little bit of research. Then you go on to the entree, and this is really like the meat of the lesson, and you have to choose how you're going to apply this knowledge and show that you understand it, or maybe that you need to go back and do a little bit more research to understand it. So here we have 5 options, and the students will choose 2. they're each worth 75 points. So the entree is worth 150 points out of the 250-point learning menu. The first option is the friends video. They're given the scenario that their best friend is out of town for a week for a family event or family emergency, and they're going to miss class all week. Well, they can't talk on the phone or anything like that, but they don't need to be falling behind on their schoolwork. So the student is tasked to do is to create a video of what they learned in class today and send it to their friend, and they need to incorporate their friend's interests because they know that their friend struggles a little bit with learning, and they know what their friend's interests are, so they need to incorporate their friend's interests to promote their friend's success in staying caught up with their schoolwork. And this is worth 75 points, so you get 25 points for accuracy of the inequalities that are presented in their video, 25 points for incorporation of their friend's interests, and 25 points for creativity and thoroughness. So I have created an example of this because any teacher, when they ask their students to do something, they should always create an example. So I created a quick example of this. I hope you enjoy it.
Hey Haley, Jessica, and Savannah told me to say hi in my video since we know you don't have your phone with you. I'm sending you a math video of what we did today, and it was called Inequalities. And those, you remember the equation things that we did like a month or so back where it was like x plus 1 equals 3, and then we solved them like that, and we got x equals 2? Yeah. Well, it's kind of the same thing, except for we do not use equal signs. That's a big no-no. What we use instead are called inequality symbols, and they look like this. So what they mean, this one that's the first one that's facing the mouth is open to the left. This means greater than. And what I mean by mouth is this part right here.
Okay, the next option for the entree is the product design. And the students are given a broad statement that they need to use graphic design and design a product that functions on inequalities. And they can take that in several ways. The examples that I provide are Plankton's wife in SpongeBob. She's a robot that he programmed, and she can make her own decisions, and she makes her own decisions, her mind up about how she feels about people and how she feels about their decisions. So that's one way that the students could design something, but they could also design a can opener or anything that they could justify that inequalities can dictate. And that doesn't mean that it has to be for real. They can make the rules up on their own. And that's why 25 points is creativity and thoroughness. So they can make it as wild and far-fetched as they want to. But they do need 25 points for incorporation of inequalities and also accuracy of those inequalities. So that's one where students who like computer science or like graphic design or like to make things up or be creative, this is one that really appeals to them and their talents. The next option is the world-saving narrative, and this is for the storyteller or the writer. I tell them there's something going on in the world that needs to be saved. It may be a zombie apocalypse, it may be everyone's dying for no reason. There's something going on that needs to be fixed, and you got to make up these rules where inequalities is the way to save them, and you need to write a narrative on it. And so that kind of leaves them open to create their own background story, their own rules for the world, and also create a story about how they could save the world with inequalities. And it's working on the same point system as the rest of the entrees. They have creativity and thoroughness, an incorporation of inequalities, and an accuracy of inequalities. And the last option, or the second to last option, is practice problems. And this is for the student who just wants to apply what they've learned, complete the practice problems, and move on. But that student still has to pick two. So even though he picks this one first, he's like, I want to do my practice problems, that this student will still have to complete one of the more creative activities as well, because this activity would be worth 75 points, and then the next activity would be worth 75 points. So they kind of even each other out. This practice activity would have 15 problems, and they get 2.5 problems for attempting and showing work on each problem, and 2.5 points for each problem that's answered correctly. And finally, this one really appeals to the musically talented, or the ones who like to write poems, that they write an inequality song. And it can be as in-depth about inequalities as they want it to be. It can be just about what the symbols mean. It can be about how to solve it or how to graph it, whatever they want it to be, as long as it is creative, it is accurate in their inequalities, and it is effective in how the inequalities are incorporated. It actually could teach someone something or help someone remember something about inequalities. And then they can record it using SoundCloud. That's something that's really popular with students nowadays, is that they can actually record their music and edit their music. And so record it using SoundCloud and make a music video, or just a video of them playing their song. Inequalities are equations without equal signs. You solve them and graph them on a number line. Alright, so after the entrees, they have really applied their knowledge and understand what inequalities are, and you make it to the dessert, and they choose one of 3 options. And the dessert is worth 25 points, and they can choose between the post quiz, presenting their video, and a quick write. So the post quiz is exactly like the pre-quiz that was on Google Forms, and there's 5 questions, and you get 5 points for each problem that's answered thoughtfully and correctly. The option 2 is the picture, and for the picture, they would draw something that represents something about inequalities. And this is what's called also the quick write, because once they draw something about inequalities, they will write a little excerpt about what is going on and why it relates to inequalities. And so 15 points are for creativity and thoroughness, and 10 points is for accuracy of the inequality incorporated. So this is a picture that I created. It's something like I would expect my students to give me. There's an inequality symbol in the middle, which is the alligator mouth, and it is open to the biggest fish rather than the other little small fish, saying that that fish is greater than the other one. And they would just need a sentence or two to explain why this inequality is incorporated, how it's incorporated, and why it makes sense. Alright, the last option for the dessert is the video presentation. And this is where if they created a video in the entree, either the friend video or a music video, they can present it to the class, which this promotes a lot of things. Students want their video to be good, so they'll create a good video. Also, it helps other students because it sometimes helps for them to see how other people perceive things and experience things. So if they can watch other students teaching them how to solve an inequality, it may help them more than if I were to just show them. Then also the music videos are a tremendous help with things like this because they help students remember. When you get a tune in your head, you can't forget the words or the lyrics. and as long as it's correct, it helps them to remember how to do things in math. So this is also worth 25 points, 15 points for creativity and thoroughness, and 10 points for the accuracy of the inequalities that are incorporated. So after the dessert, we go to the ticket, and it's the inevitable part of the meal, but the meal was so worth it that it really didn't matter. And it's the final activity. It's a quiz, and it is it's worth 20 points. 5-question quiz. You get 2 points for attempting and showing their work, and 2 points for answering them correctly. And all of these things work together on a path for student success. My favorite thing about the whole learning menu is that students can work at their own pace, they can choose their own path, they can choose things that interest them, they can make them as creative as they want to, they can make them as thorough as they want to, and they can really be the directors of their own learning and gain their own knowledge, rather than if I were to stand in front and say, this is what an inequality is, this means less than, this means greater than, this is how you work it, this is how you graph it. The students, a lot of them would benefit more from a learning menu style of lesson rather than a copy down notes lecture. And this learning menu also presents a lot of using digital tools and resources that help promote student success and collaboration and engagement. So that is why I created this learning menu, and that is how it works.
In conclusion, for my final project, I created a learning menu. The menu's purpose was to allow my students to reach the learning goals for simple inequalities through their own path. I strove to accommodate the diverse learning needs of my students by providing options, and I promoted digital literacy and engagement through options which integrated the use of digital tools and incorporated the interests of my students. Thank you for watching the discussion and presentation of my final project.